Hi, Mahsa and Amy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. You're representing Rumeysa Ozturk and Mahmoud Khalil. And can I start off by can you explain why your clients, Rumeysa Ozturk and Mahmoud Khalil, were detained? And what is the US government claiming in each of these cases?
Well, Rumeysa Ozturk, as you know, is a PhD student at Tufts studying child development, child study and human development, and previously was at Columbia as a Fulbright scholar. And unfortunately, because of an op-ed that she wrote about a year ago with several of her colleagues at Tufts, talking about the genocide in Palestine, about the need for human dignity for all people, was picked up by ICE. And essentially, it's a free speech issue. She's been targeted for that one op-ed that she wrote.
Amy, how's your case?
Similar in that Mahmoud Khalil I'm one of many attorneys on Mahmoud's case, and he was taken on March 8th after a long and sustained harassment and discrimination campaign against him for his advocacy for Palestinian human rights and his anti-war and anti-genocide advocacy at Columbia. He was very present in the media and didn't wear a mask, so he was clearly identified. He used his name. He's a Palestinian man. I think all of these things, including the incredible attention on Columbia University, raised his profile for this government and its implementation of an anti-Palestinian and frankly racist policy that is rounding up students and people speaking on behalf of Palestinians and for Palestinian human rights and against the genocide. And so Mahmoud was taken by the government for that advocacy. And Secretary of State Rubio has alleged falsely, without any evidence, that Mahmoud is ultimately a threat to American foreign policy, or his presence in the country is adverse to American foreign policy.
Yes, so essentially, both of your clients have been detained for their advocacy for speaking out against wars, which is something a lot of college students do in this country. And so the court has paused the judge's order to move Rumeysa to Vermont. What does the pause mean and why is it important?
So essentially what's happened is her case was first heard in Massachusetts because that's where we thought that she was. And so I filed the habeas at the Massachusetts court. But unbeknownst to us, ICE had quickly moved her to Vermont, and she was at Vermont at the time of the filing. And so now the Vermont court has been hearing the case and determined that she should be brought back to Vermont for a number of the different legal arguments that we've made. And essentially, they've now appealed that to the next higher level court, saying that no, Vermont doesn't have jurisdiction. It should be in Louisiana, where she is at present. And the judge has now said, no, I don't agree with you. She was here, and therefore we're going to have the case in Vermont. But now the government has appealed that, and it's gone up to the next higher level court, the Second Circuit. And they're now reviewing the government's opposition of transferring her to Vermont for a bail hearing, which is supposed to take place next week. And next week, we will also have those oral arguments at the Second Circuit to decide whether or not the government has a case in terms of pausing her transfer from Louisiana to Vermont.
Right, and as you mentioned, your clients in Louisiana and Mahmoud Khalil is also there. Can you guys describe the conditions in the Louisiana detention center and the general conditions under ICE detention?
Yeah, go ahead. So Rumeysa is basically in a prison, despite the fact of not having violated any laws, being charged for any crime, with roughly 900 other women who, again, the majority of them have had no interaction with the law enforcement system, have not been accused of any crimes, charged with any crimes. And frankly, that's, I think, appalling. As supposed free leader of the world, our country should be upholding human rights for all and not sending women into essentially a prison condition and having all of their freedom restricted. And for Rumeysa, one of the additional concerns that we have is her health. She has asthma and a number of other health issues, and these facilities are for-profit prisons. They're not looking to care for the women that they're responsible for, unfortunately. And so it's been a very difficult situation. When we first started out, we had some difficulty in terms of communication. There was significant difficulty and delay in getting her medications. And then finally, with some time now, she's been detained for roughly 5 weeks, unbelievably. And, unfortunately, the dehumanization of immigrants in prison-like situations is really tolling on not only her, but for all of the other women there. And that's one thing that I've been amazed at what Rumeysa has done is not focus merely on her own problems and her own conditions, but what the other women there are experiencing as well.
Yes, and how's Mahmoud doing in Louisiana?
I mean, there's a similar situation at the facility in Jina where Mahmoud is located. And, in the winter or closer to March when he was taken, early March, it was really cold in there. And, Mahmoud will always say, I'm cold, but I know the people of Gaza, it's wintertime there and they are intense. At least I have a roof over my head. Or I've been cold in here, but my friend was able to deliver a couple of sweatshirts that I'm allowed to have, whereas the people of Gaza don't have access to any more clothes and nothing's allowed in, nothing's allowed out. And so it's actually been really hard to get him to speak about his own experience there, because he'll always say, he'll always bring it back to Gaza and what people are experiencing. But the other piece is he'll also talk frequently about the many other people who are languishing in there with him, who don't have the media attention that his case has, who don't have the 27 or whatever number it is now attorneys working on their cases. Many of them have been in there for quite a long time, months, even years. They don't have attorneys. They don't have people in the United States who know where they are, or community or family members who are able to be in touch with them. And so I think, the fact is that there are hundreds of people in this facility languishing without the same type of attention Mahmoud has. So he uses every opportunity, despite his own suffering and negative experiences in there, to raise that up for all of us to make sure that the people in these facilities that are, we use terms like facility or even detention center, but they're cages. People are in cages right now, and they can't move about freely. They are treated in the same way prisoners are. Our clients are political prisoners, but many others in there are in there for no crime. It's a civil detention, and are forgotten.
Yeah, so they're raising this larger systemic issue while they're there, they're witnessing this. And their stories also ring true to many people who are like looking at the family drama that has taken place. Rumeysa was a PhD student. She was worried. There were threats against her, and the whole world was horrified by the scenes of her being taken off the street. Thankfully, people actually filmed it so we could see how horrifying it was. And Mahmoud has been detained. It's been longer. It was early March when he was detained. His wife was 8 months pregnant at the time. She has now given birth, and Mahmoud couldn't be there at the birth of their first child, despite his wife's pleas. Can you speak on their personal characters and how they've been dealing with all of this?
So, I think one of the most unknown parts of Rumeysa's story is that she was actually on the phone with her mom when these agents surrounded her, grabbed her phone, and she screamed. I can't even imagine what it must be like to think that my child would be across the world in another country, supposedly in a safe environment, and to be treated in a way as if these are kidnappers approaching her instead of U.S. government law enforcement. And so it's been difficult. Obviously, she doesn't have her family here. They're across the ocean in another country. There's language barriers. There's time differences, not understanding the American legal system, and basically the weaponization of our immigration system to detain people like Rumeysa, like Mahmoud, and others. And so, I think we should all think about what kind of example are we setting as a country for the rest of the world when we're treating our international students in this way? young people who have studied their lives to dedicate to their careers, to their studies, to come here and further their education, and to then be treated as if they're a criminal. And as Amy said, basically they're political prisoners. And that's absolutely wrong. And I can't even imagine what other people in the world must be thinking when they see the United States is treating people like this. What does that mean for us?
And even for them, I mean, I think one of the things that's been hardest in working with international students, not specifically Mahmoud per se, is, well, once everybody knows that this isn't true about me, once there's no evidence, once it's proven to the world that there's no reason for me to be here, that I am not who they say that I am, I am not any of these things that they say that I am, once that comes out, I'll be free. And what's so remarkable, even as an attorney, where we recognize the rule of law, we have respect for the rule of law, these sort of procedural hurdles that keep innocent people, and in this case, they weren't even charged with anything in the first place, so it's not even about innocence, these false accusations made against them, that we still have to jump through all these procedural hurdles in order for them to be free. And that's something that's, Mahmoud is not a dangerous person. He is a bridge builder. He is a person who works across differences and tries to listen across differences and build collaborations. He's training to be a diplomat ultimately, and somebody who tries to bring people together. And so as he's trying to do all of these things and believing in the systems that allow all of these things to happen, he's being kept away from his family. And that takes a toll. I mean, he missed the birth of his, not just a child, that he and his wife were excited to welcome, but the first child. And when we went to ask for him to be temporarily released in order to be present there, we were denied. And I can't emphasize enough that that is a cruelty, and he has missed something so precious that he will never have an opportunity again to witness the birth of his first child. That is gone, and it's been stolen from him and from his wife. And, not that the baby necessarily knew this, but stolen from the baby as well. And I think that as Mahmoud and Noor have evidenced incredible faith that eventually the truth will come out. They have been incredibly gracious, receiving the love and the support that's coming from an incredibly diverse community who's reached out to them and offered all kinds of support, from baby gifts to money donations to legal, donations to a legal fund. I don't know how they've kept such fortitude and such steadfastness in this experience that they've gone through, but they have. I think it's been some of us around them that have actually been really having the meltdowns, as opposed to. But what I will just say, similar to the story with Rumeysa, is I was on the phone with both Mahmoud and Noor that evening when Mahmoud was taken, and Noor's presence of mind, where are you taking him? Mm-hmm. What are your names? Where, what's going to happen? Why is this happening? Do you have a warrant? It's the long story of people of color in this country having to demonstrate fortitude in the face of violence and strength in the face of violence that they shouldn't be asked to have to be that strong. And yet these two people have been over and over again. And it's remarkable, though they shouldn't have to be remarkable. They should just be together.
Yes, but as you say, their stances so far has been truly inspiring, what they've had to endure, and the whole world has been watching their story. But do you think these stories represent a wider pattern of the Trump administration targeting immigrants from Muslim backgrounds?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and unfortunately, it hasn't just been Republican administrations. We've been seeing this for decades, where, again, the immigration system, our criminal court system, are being abused to target people of color, whether they're African Americans and the high incarceration rates in those communities, whereas the Muslim community being targeted with Muslim travel and Africa travel bans. This is something systemic that needs to be addressed in our legal system. And, if we had to find any kind of silver lining from these cases and from other high-profile cases throughout our history, is to highlight these problems and to advocate to change them and ensure that there's equality for everyone, regardless of whether or not you're Muslim or Palestinian or African American, and it shouldn't matter what issue you're advocating for. And unfortunately, the Trump administration has used this wedge that was created during the Biden administration, where students protesting the genocide in Palestine were targeted by their universities, by their police, and not allowed to exercise their freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression. And so I hope that now we're coming together and realizing the damage that was caused during that time, and that we come together and stand up for freedom of expression for all people.
Mm-hmm. And Amy, you mentioned how a broad coalition of people are now supporting you, supporting Mahmoud Khalil, and the same goes for Rumeysa. Both were bridge builders seeking for peace. So can you talk about the Jewish voices in particular that have been speaking out, and in broadly the coalition, the demonstrations that have been happening? How has this support been, and how important is this support?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing that's really critical to say just in general about the student movement, and this is true not just around Palestine, but it's been true with gun, a lot of the young people who are trying to get gun legislation passed, who have experienced all different kinds of shootings in their schools, neighborhoods, malls, grocery stores. Our young people in the climate movement, et cetera, are working across communities. They are recognizing something that some of the older generations didn't do quite as well. I'm not saying they didn't do it because I don't want to get any, but that these young people, there are Jewish activists and people speaking out for Palestinian human rights and against the genocide. There are students of color, American students of color from the South, whose parents grew up in Jim Crow South, who see resonances between what's happening in apartheid Israel and Palestine, and they feel something in their gut and feel compelled to speak out. And there are Arab, Muslim, South Asian, an amazing array of people, and they're all in alignment around human rights and around climate. They want a planet to live on as they get older and if they choose to have children themselves. And so the coalition that has come together to support Mahmoud existed before. And it's because they're effective that what is happening now to Mahmoud and to Rumeysa is possible. Our students are showing us that there is a different and better future that is possible. It threatens the status quo. And so there are very calculated efforts to silence and cherry pick people so that people are so afraid to talk that it silences this incredibly diverse movement. I have been working in disciplinary defense at Columbia University. The only white students that I have represented so far identify as Jewish. Otherwise, all the students I've been working with are students of color, Arab, Muslim, South Asian students. And that just goes to show that in these diverse movements, because they are so effective, there needs to be these divisive, this effort to divide and conquer, to split the groups apart, to find places of fracture. And I think what is being demonstrated now, whether it's people who believe in the First Amendment and rights to freedom of speech and expression and association, whether they be specific on Palestine and a liberated Palestine, whether they be Black Lives Matter, what's happening is these coalitions are seeing that their struggles are entwined, that we all rise together, we need each other, and so they're not falling for the trap that this administration is hoping they'll fall for, and they're choosing to continue to mobilize, not just on behalf of Rumeysa and Mahmoud, but on behalf of Palestinians, on behalf of Sudanese, on behalf of Congolese, and all the struggles around the world and here in the United States.
Yeah, so you're right. These cases have been a catalyst to further mobilize people, and they've reignited a spark in a lot of the movements here in the US and have brought people together. Mahsa, I wanted to ask you, How's Rumeysa's family in Turkey taking all of this news here? Like, all of this crazy stuff is happening in the States. And I know from my own experience that Turkish families can be very worried about their children. And all the way across the sea, Rumeysa is here and she's been in detention for more than 5 weeks. How have your conversations been with Rumeysa's family in Turkey?
Yeah, I've had some number of conversations with the family just about the process, about how she's doing, and having them try to, helping them try to understand everything. Part of it is trying to explain the different procedural aspects of the courts, and then the immigration court, and then having someone who's committed no crime, being accused of no crime, still being in a prison setting is, I think, very difficult to comprehend for them and even for us. But they've been handling it well. They're really spending a lot of time trying to read and understand the different things happening in the court and following things in the press. So I've been incredibly impressed with how they've been holding up.
And based on your previous experiences, what's the precedent for cases like this and what kind of outcomes are we hoping for?
I mean, well, from the immigration court aspect or the immigration law perspective, this is unprecedented. I have never seen in my 25 years of practicing immigration law and working with international students and people on all different types of visas, I've never seen visas being revoked like this while a person is in the United States. That is actually unlawful. That is against our proper procedures and our policies. And then taking it to the next level to actually terminate student status in SEVIS, the system that kind of houses this database of international students here. We've never seen, and there's never been authority actually for the government to go in and to terminate a student's status on their own. That's something that's done by the universities. If a student doesn't show up to classes or works without authorization or something happens that triggers the student to no longer warrant being here in the SEVA system. So to have the government be taking these extraordinary steps to put these resources and time in targeting innocent students advocating for human rights and dignity for all is really appalling to me as an attorney, and should be appalling to all people around the world, because that's just not how we should be operating.
Yeah, and this is definitely unprecedented, as you underlined, and students on green cards or on student visas can be targeted for their free speech. Do you think this has the potential to extend to Americans as well?
Yes, I do. I do think so. And I don't think we're there yet. And I'm certainly not going to hypothesize here and give anybody any ideas about what that could look like. But I do think that there are efforts to challenge naturalization processes and people with who are naturalized citizens of the United States. The Trump administration has been very clear about that. There are also criminal statutes that can be weaponized against American citizens. For Mahmoud and Rumeysa and Laqa and all of these other students, these young people are more vulnerable because they don't have citizenship. But certainly there are enough rumblings now that I think we need to be mindful. I will also just point out that some of the the law that the Secretary of State is trying to cite to for grounds in Mahmoud's case has been used historically to eject Americans from the United States. I was just listening the other day to some reporting around that some of these laws were used against Paul Robeson and against W.E.B. Du Bois, the famous African-American sociologist here in the United States. The Palmer raids and other groups who are accused of being anarchists or communists, stripping them of citizenship and removing them. And so this is not the first time that this has happened. It's unprecedented in recent history, but not in our entire history. And of course, we need to acknowledge also that we've always excluded people from this country and from access to citizenship in this country, and have been very free over time, choosing which groups to allow in and which groups to keep out, like the Chinese Exclusion Acts of the 1800s, et cetera. So it is unprecedented, and also it is based on precedent of exclusion and of using sort of criminalization processes and immigration processes to pick and choose who we want to allow in and who we want to remove from this country.
How have the universities been supporting your clients in this process? Like, has Columbia and Tufts provided support to their PhD student and their former student?
I think we have vastly different experiences with the universities. Thankfully, Tufts University has been incredibly supportive of Rumeysa on many different angles. And we're deeply appreciative of their support, not only for Rumeysa, but other international students on campus, and standing up for free speech.
And how about in your case? I think it's been a bit different with Columbia.
Columbia University has been perpetually directly harming its students, and has not, the one statement they recently made where they even mentioned Mohsin and Mahmoud's name, it was a mealy-mouthed statement. It wasn't really a statement of support as much as we know that people in our community are really worried about them. But Columbia has been a place of great strife and struggle, and even just, saying Palestine, it seems like, can yield a disciplinary complaint, even if a hearing or a process isn't formulated after that. And so the way that these cases have been framed through Columbia University does make students sound like, or the way they frame about the students makes it sound like the students themselves are dangerous or violent, or, the rhetoric coming out of Columbia itself is harmful to the students. However, Columbia, I think if you talk to people on that campus, and this is based on the letters of support we did get from people on the Columbia campus, including Jewish members of the Columbia campus, which Mohsin also had, are incredibly supportive, and talking about how these are nonviolent acts, that these students are seeking to create a better world by being against genocide. I mean, that should be something that should be celebrated, that the students are our moral conscience. Columbia refuses to take that stance, and instead have actually perpetually harmed. What I will flag, and I think it's important to do this, is that there are universities all over the country who have been providing immigration attorneys to their students, who have been following SEVIS closely. And the moment they hear that there has been any kind of a revocation or a change of status, are immediately alerting the students, so that the students aren't walking around not knowing that that's happened. So there are universities and colleges in this country doing the right thing. And there were recently 200 colleges and universities who wrote a letter to the Trump administration saying that there has been an effort to erode their academic freedom rights, which they are entitled to under the First Amendment and under Supreme Court law, and that their students have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights. And so there are universities doing the right thing. Columbia is not one.
Right, and while Tufts and some universities are doing the right thing, why Columbia, which is one of the top institutions in the world, still not standing with their students who are under threat?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But what I do know is that it's costing them their integrity as an institution. And it's incredibly sad because of the history that you mentioned. There are incredible scholars and students at that university who deserve better.
And it's certainly a university that's been in the forefront of civil struggles in the past. And that's why it's very interesting to see. So, what would a fair and just outcome look like for your clients at this point?
Being released immediately. They should both immediately be able to leave these prison facilities and go home to their families, to their communities, to their careers, to their education, and go back to where they kind of were left off.
And be able to do so while holding the beliefs that they hold and speaking freely about them.
What can the public or the international community do to support or continue supporting your clients?
This is a hard question because this administration does not appear to care about the rule of law, both internationally or nationally, foreign or domestic. I always encourage people to certainly make their voices heard to their representatives and their senators to let them know that they want to see the release of these students specifically, but also to stop the criminalization and suppressing of the speech of these students, to not pass laws that are on the floor right now, seeking to roll back their First Amendment rights. And so I think all of us need to be gathering around our young people now and our own First Amendment rights to speak freely. But I would also say that there's a bigger effort here by this administration, which is to isolate people, to make people fear each other, to drive wedges between people who would otherwise be allies and supportive of each other. And that's not just the domestic U.S. Community, but internationally as well, as we see tariffs and all kinds of things, being bandied about. And I think one of the things that people can do, and this sounds so silly, but I cannot emphasize it enough. We need to choose to educate ourselves and find reliable resources and information to know what's happening. We need to choose not to fear each other and refuse to allow the U.S. government or any government to drive wedges between people. And we need to continue to humanize each other and view each other as siblings on this planet. We want the planet to go on. We want to be healthy. We want to be well. We want to gather. We want to love. We want all of these things. Most people want that. And so it sounds silly to say, but we can continue to gather. We can continue to love. We can continue to show up for each other across spaces and across time, and just choose not to engage in this racism, this hatred, this discrimination, and these efforts to isolate us from each other.
Yeah, since when did speaking up against oppression become a crime, right? Since when did we want to tell our young people, don't advocate for freedom and human rights and dignity for all? And while right now they're going after international students, the Trump administration has actually talked about deporting U.S. citizens to prisons overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I could have never imagined that a U.S. president would talk about sending U.S. citizens to overseas prisons known for their human rights abuses.
Unimaginable, unprecedented words we seem to use every day nowadays. Thank you to both of you for being with us today and sharing your very important perspectives on these cases. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, together.
Yes.